Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Ruth.
Hey, how
Hello.
are you on?
Great. I want to welcome everyone to a Sunday evening edition of the Bishop's Interview, and we're really excited about tonight. Want to say hello to everyone in the chat. I see quite a few folks who join us frequently, so we appreciate that. Ruth, how's your day been?
Good. I don't know. I'm starting school tomorrow. My classes start tomorrow. So I've been trying to get all of those pre-class things done that I need to get done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't you go ahead and introduce this topic a little bit, Ruth, and then we'll bring in our very special guest tonight.
Yeah. So I think we've talked about it before that when I started my deconstruction, I found my community on TikTok. And I came across this post one time, and it was talking about this city called Iosepa in Utah. And this was a story that I had never heard before. Been a member for my whole life. And I've always had a soft spot in my heart for the Hawaiian Islands and the Hawaiian people. And when I heard this TikToker talk about this place, my heart broke. And I feel like it is a story that nobody knows and that people need to hear. And so I was so excited when I reached out to Ipolani and asked her if she would share her story with us. And I think she's going to give us quite the education tonight. And I hope everyone enjoys this information. It's going to be great.
Awesome. Well, that's a great introduction. So let's bring in Ipolani. Hello, Ipolani. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we are so happy to have you. We have lots of people joining us online already, but no one more excited than Ruth and I. So,
Yep.
I'm so glad to be here. This is going to be fun.
so we just determined that. Of course, I'm in Tennessee. Ruth's in Arizona, and Ipolani, you're in California. Is that right?
That's right. I'm just about an hour north of San Francisco.
Okay. So none of us are holding down the Utah fort tonight,
Nope.
so that's good. But I'm betting that there'll be some Utah representation in the chat, and probably even we had someone telling us they were in Southern Australia. I think last time they were like, we were talking about how cold it was, and they're like, "Oh, it's 108 here." So
Yeah.
Ipolani, thank you so much. Will you just introduce yourself a little bit for everyone that's joining? Some people might know you, many probably won't. So just take a second there and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Aloha. My name is Ipolani Bove, but my maiden name is Hussey. Um, I lived in Utah with my parents until I was about 30, and then we moved to California. However, my mother's Haole, that means she's foreign to Hawaii, and my father's Native Hawaiian. My father, at 18, when he graduated Kamehameha schools, he joined the Air Force and he moved to Mountain Home, Idaho, where he met my mother. My mother did not want to move back to the Hawaiian Islands, so they settled in Salt Lake City, Utah, where my father went on to go to the University of Utah and get his LCSW as a clinical social worker. And there he worked for many, many years for Intermountain Healthcare, and raised us for the most part in Utah. But we had many, many summers that we were shipped back to Hawaii to spend time and learn about our culture and all of that good stuff. But during the school year, we went to public school in West Valley City. So I am here because we're going to talk about Iosepa. Iosepa is a colony of Native Hawaiians that can be found in Skull Valley, Utah, and that's about an hour and 45 minutes outside of the Salt Lake Valley. So if you go past Grantsville and you're heading on I-80 West and you're kind of over by the Morton Salt plant, there's a sign that says Iosepa. When you turn off and you head south on that very long, very arid, very desolate dirt road, as if you're going towards, it's an army depot way out there. You come to a very desolate place, and there is a graveyard. Right now, as it stands, it's beautiful. There's a monument there, but those graves hold the bones of many, many Native Hawaiians. Those Native Hawaiians in about 1844, 1845, Joseph Fielding Smith was sent to the Hawaiian Islands to mission the Hawaiian Islands. And over a bit of time, he convinced some of those Native Hawaiians to come back to Salt Lake City, Utah, and work on the temple. When those Hawaiians decided to do that and they traveled from Hawaii to the Salt Lake Valley, they were met with a lot of racism, fear, and they wanted to settle. They thought that they were promised something very beautiful, but when they got there, they were met with something very different than what they thought they were going to get met with.
Yeah.
They first settled in the valley. There was a lot of rumors about leprosy. There are some newspaper articles in Salt Lake that you can still pull up that are very fear-mongering. So then they got moved to Boyle Heights. They tried to settle there. The church tried to settle them there for a little bit of time. That didn't work out either. So what they then did was they moved them into Skull Valley. So let's fast forward.
Okay.
A lot of them died there, but let's fast forward a little bit. In the 80s, my father and several of his Polynesian colleagues realized that there was all these graveyards of Native Hawaiians. And the three families, my family, the Ikaus, and the Kellys, all came together, and we would all go out there in our vans and do what we could. And our fathers started to see how they could take care of this graveyard. When they found this dilapidated graveyard, currently it was owned by a rancher. The rancher let the cows in. Some of the graveyards you couldn't see. My father discovered this because of a paper that was written by a bachelor student in history on this place. And when we found that paper, and I still have it, it's not published, they went out there to look at it, and I think it was sort of devastating to see that graveyard just abandoned. So they took it upon themselves to start rehabilitating it and finding out what happened there. So as we grew up, every Memorial weekend, we'd have to go out and mow the lawn, and we'd have to go out and dig out all the terrible things that you find in a graveyard that's left unkempt. So that's why I'm here today. I was
Okay.
Mormon for, I was born into the covenant. Okay, was baptized at 8. We lived the life. We were indoctrinated. We didn't know anything different.
Yep.
But I did leave home early. There was something when you go to Hawaii and you are raised with something outside of Mormonism, there was some conflicts for me. So I left the Mormon Church at a pretty young age. I left home at a pretty young age. So that kind of gave me this opportunity to look at this place called Iosepa with the non-Mormon lens. And this is where I find myself talking about the things that the church taught me about Iosepa and what the missing part of the story is for me. So
Okay, so I see some folks in the chat, and one specifically, my friend Ron Jorgensen. He was the one I mentioned to you earlier. He's a pretty knowledgeable Mormon history guy, and I don't want to speak for Ron, but I was surprised to find out that Ron had never really heard much about this. So I'm super excited that we're going to bring some light to this topic. Let me ask you, Ruth, what has been your connection with Hawaii, and just to kind of get that angle?
Yeah, that's an interesting, I don't know that I've told you this story. So my family joined the church when I was 9 years old, and we had a group of sister missionaries and elders that were teaching us. And one of the sister missionaries is from Hawaii. She's Hawaiian. Her name is also Ipo.
nice.
And I actually, even before that, I just, for whatever reason, as a young child, I probably like first grade, I remember doing a big report on Hawaii. I just loved the islands. And then Ipo came into my life. Loved her. My family loved her. And I don't have any real connection. I don't have family. I don't have any reason other than my heart just loves the island and loves the island people so much. And so every chance I can, I go to Hawaii.
Me
I love
too.
all of the islands. So
Ruth, what do you know about Laie? What do you know about and what did you know, what is familiar to you as far as the sort of Laie part of the island on Oahu, the PCC,
yeah.
the temple there?
So pre 2023, I thought that the church cherished their Hawaiian people and that they have always done right by them because of this love that Joseph Fielding Smith or F. Smith, Fielding, whichever one, because of his connection with the islands. I thought that they were treated well. And it wasn't until, so I've been to the PCC when I was 16. We went with our family. We saw Ipo and her family. I've been to the Laie Temple several times. My daughter went to BYU Hawaii. So I went several times while she was there. I didn't know what I know now, because what I've learned from you, and my heart breaks for the that they've been taken advantage of and the mistreatment. And part of it, I don't quite understand how the Hawaiian people that are still so faithful, how they don't hurt the way I hurt for them.
I mean, I think I ask myself the same thing.
Yeah.
Having some insight into the history of Hawaii and the political climate that was happening when Joseph F. Smith was there. There's something really pivotal that happened in 1945, 1946, and many people don't understand the connection with the monarchy and the political climate in that year, and how the church was really able to take advantage of that and secure their position in Laie. Now, if we can just go back really quickly and just talk about, in that point in time, the church in Utah is in a state, they're trying to raise funds. They need cash crops. So this is why they do sugar beets too, right? All these sugar crops bring money quickly. Now, when Joseph Fielding Smith went to Hawaii on Oahu, he was very young.
He was
And
15.
and at that time, the political climate was very, very unstable for Hawaiians. So in 1945, Kamehameha Liholiho passed what is called the Great Land Mahele. There's a couple of systems in Hawaii that, and it changed the way that Hawaiians and foreigners could access land very drastically. So when the Great Land Mahele occurred, it enabled Native Hawaiians to sell their land. So the Native Hawaiian mindset, when foreigners would come and be like, sign this piece of paper, I want this land. They were like, okay, paper. Native Hawaiian mindset, no one can own land. So when a couple years happen and the church come in and they're trying to acquire land, a lot of land in Laie was signed over to them without the full knowledge of the Western mindset of how that would work. And then the sugar crops partially funded what was happening in Utah for the building of the temple. But this Great Land Mahele changed and turned the land into a commodity. So this is really, really important to remember. And it's also really important to remember that at that time in Hawaii, the monarchy, the sovereign government, had been overthrown illegally. There was a provisional government in place, and they were a committee of about 7 foreign businessmen, and they wanted to be able to access the economical and natural resources of Hawaii for themselves. So the church was able to jump on this and sort of take advantage of that moment in time. So some of that land in Laie was acquired right after the Great Land Mahele. And there are Mormon families today in Laie that are still fighting for their water rights, and it's very suppressed. They're still fighting for their water rights with the church. So this is also an integral piece. So you have to understand the Hawaiians at that time were very unsure about what was happening with their government. They were were feeling very unsafe. They didn't like it. And when the missionaries came to Hawaii, I just have to give you a little backstory. And they translated the Bible into a written language. For Hawaii, Hawaii was an oral language only. When the missionaries came and translated it and turned the Hawaiian language into a written language, because of the way the oral mind had to work for the Native Hawaiians, they were very, very intelligent. Between 1811 and 1822, when they translated the Bible into English and helped create this written language for the Native Hawaiians, 95% of Native Hawaiians were literate. They could read and they could write, not only in English, but in their own language, Olelo Hawaii. And this is really something important to remember when it comes to Iosepa later down the road. Native Hawaiians loved the written word. Native Hawaiians had over 33 Native Hawaiian owned and operated between 1822 and 1847 Native Hawaiian newspapers. And we have all of these resources in Hawaii that you can access. We can go and read Native Hawaiian thought. We can go and see all these things. So these are things that as a Native Hawaiian, we know about ourselves. We know, one, that we can read and write. We are not easily coerced into anything. It has to be really profound and compelling. And we love to communicate and we love to debate. Native Hawaiians have many different views. So this is really important to remember, because some of the narrative that the church shares later down the road about Native Hawaiians who existed in Iosepa.
Yeah.
So
their worth ethic. Yeah. Go ahead, Nathan.
So let me jump in real quick. I am coming at this Iosepa topic as someone who just learned about it really in the past couple days.
Yeah.
And so I want to also assume that many of the viewers, either on now or in the future. So let me just present my screen real quick. This is, if you go to the church website, this is what you'll find about Iosepa. And there's, I don't know, 6 or 7 paragraphs, and almost all of them are talking strictly about Joseph F. Smith going on a mission, and he loved the people, and, very little about this actual town or community. I'm not exactly, is it considered a town?
Settlement?
A settlement?
It was considered a ranch.
Okay.
It was considered like a working ranch.
So if you go on the church website, you're going to hear all about Joseph F. Smith, but not really all that much about what I've learned from you just in the little bit that I've been able. So we do have some slides, and I'm going to kind of ask Ruth to help us go through. And basically, in my mind, the questions are: why did the Hawaiian people come here? Here meaning Utah. Why did they end up in, I guess, what's called Skull Valley, which seems like a not very
inviting place.
Yes.
And then I think one of the very important things in my mind is when this story is talked about, what I've learned being 2 years now into the ex-Mormon space, I've learned that almost any freaking thing the church tells, any story they tell, you might as well just go ahead and, and either just say it's going to be completely wrong or it's going to be greatly,
whitewashed,
distorted. What? Yes.
Yeah. So,
yes.
So I guess those are my questions. Like, in what ways has the church done that with this topic? And of course, anyone else in the chat that wants to add to some of these questions, feel free to chime in. So let me just present a couple of these slides. This is what you would see today. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
This monument here that you see on the screen, my father created the 501c3 that raised the money to raise this monument. None of the money came from the church, and the bust on here we believe is King Kamehameha. He would never in writing admit to that, but knowing my father and it's interesting, some of the Native Hawaiian songs that are composed about this place, because this is how we make history. We write a song or a little bit of a blurb or a story about this place. There are some that were written. They talk about the bust being King Kamehameha, but it was paid for by Princess Abigail. A lot of people think that the Mormon Church came in and helped revive it, and they go out every Memorial Day, but they did not.
Oh,
it was
wow.
almost all Native Hawaiian money that has revived this.
Okay, well, that's the first thing that I assumed, that this would be like, the Adirondack site and all this other stuff that the church has put money into, monuments and things. But I guess I've already learned one thing, that is. Anything else on this slide? Oh, it looks like we lost Ruth. All right, let's go to the next slide and see what we had here.
What you see here is in the one where it shows the mountain range in the back in color, and you can see the graves. All of these cement casings are things that Iosepa Historical Society and the Native Hawaiian community and Polynesian community in Utah either sweat equity or raise money themselves and poured these to mark every single grave. When we would go out there, the fence wasn't there, it was dilapidated, and those cement boxes also were not there. And that took many, many years. The monument went up in, I think, 1997, and then it wasn't until later in 1998 that there's a pavilion behind it that went up. But what you see is this is where the graveyard was. The township was actually down closer to the road, and there were houses, there was a general store, there was a place where when the people came over and finally settled in Skull Valley, it was because they were basically kicked out of every other part of the Salt Lake Valley for several reasons. You can look up the newspaper articles, but there was a lot of hysteria about leprosy, disease, and a lot of Native Hawaiians also had Chinese mixed with them or with them. So what they did was the church purchased this property and with the intention of turning it into a ranch, and the Native Hawaiians went out there and worked the ranch, and then when they were allowed to, they would go on a 2-day walk over the mountain, end up in Grantsville, drop off, their wheat for milling, and then another day into the Salt Lake Valley to work on the temple for a few days, and then make another 2-day journey back. There was a slide in here. There's ki'ipohaku in the English language that would translate to petroglyphs.
Yeah.
When they would walk over on their 2-day trip, like how Native Hawaiians do, they make their naki'ipohaku, their petroglyph carvings. So when we would come here to clean on Memorial Weekend or a few days before, we would always go up and, visit that and talk about how they made these treacherous 2-day trips just to go work on the temple. I think what's really interesting is the narrative is that the Native Hawaiian people are such strong and deep faith. And, really, I believe it. They were. But also, I think it's really a painful thing to not disclose that they were paid by the church. there is Iosepa money. So try and imagine you go and work for your boss, you live on your boss's land, and you only get paid in certificates given to you by your boss, and you can only spend those certificates in the store that is owned by your boss. So the level of control they had over these members was very, very all levels. They had all the control. There are a lot of baby graves out there, and we have to remember that the Native Hawaiian women were left out there to birth at Iosepa. The white leadership that had homes there were taken by wagon into Grantsville to have their babies in Grantsville. These are some of the things in the research that was done that were key for me. And it has, I should have screenshotted it, but the Native Hawaiians at one point rose up there and were really frustrated because they weren't making the same living wage. They never talk about that in the narrative of the church, and they were demanding better wages because they were far below what their white counterparts in Salt Lake City were making. And we have to remember, they're literate. They can read, they can write. So when they go to Salt Lake and they kind of see what's going on there, they can read newspaper, they understand that they're making a lot less. And when they were in Hawaii, they were told that this is the promised land. Just sort of the same missionary tactics in the 19th century that everybody got. This is a much better place. So when I start to learn about these things, I said, well, let's dig a little deeper. There's personal oral stories of children that are running on the train tracks and they're gathering coal, and they have to run all the way home because if somebody else sees those little kids with coal, it might get stolen. So this is stress within our own Native Hawaiian community for heat. None of these things were talked about.
So let me see if I understand this part then. So we know that during this time period, people were coming in the church, people were immigrating to, well, along the way, but I guess at this point it would have been to Salt Lake. All of the other people would just integrate into the society there, but this particular group were basically told, no, you guys need to stay together. Oh, and you can't really stay here. You need to go find your own little spot. Is that kind of what happened?
The church viewed the Native Hawaiian colony as a special project. So the leadership, all the way from the top, told them where to go and what to do. They didn't have this sort of free agency that we imagine some of the other settlers had to come into the valley and integrate into and assimilate into the valley. Dennis Atkinson is a professor, and he wrote this paper in 1950 or 1951, and he makes it very clear that the higher up in the church, this was their special project. They were in Hawaii and were like, come to Utah and work on the temple. You come here. They were convincing them to come. So I think it was a group of, I think it was over, I want to say 70, but I don't remember the initial number.
I read that.
So when they faced racism, the church moved them to Boyle Heights. When they found a lot of conflict there, the church then said, oh, okay, let's buy this ranch. Let's put them out there. And they sort of padded them so there really was no free agency. So this is this narrative where we grew up, where like our aunts, it was really hard out here, but they chose to go to Iosepa and Skull Valley. That's misleading.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Native Hawaiians didn't have a choice where to go. They were put there by higher leadership. So this idea that they chose to be out there, which is something that I feel like the church allows to blossom, that particular narrative isn't true. They would have rather been in the valley.
They were treated, I mean, the racism against the Hawaiians, from what I've read, was bad. They talked about them as if they were lazy, that they didn't have any kind of work ethic, that they brought diseases with them.
Yeah.
They were just treated so poorly just because of the color of their skin.
Yeah. And it was really, So it's really interesting because when the Native Hawaiians did turn Iosepa, the settlement, into something really, really beautiful,
Yes.
then the church ran in and, promoted that. Their faith allowed them to be so, you know,
Industrious.
resourceful. So
Yeah.
some of the stories from the Native Hawaiian perspective, um, Native Hawaiians were really ma'a is used to or familiar with finding water.
Yep.
So there was an aquifer up above. They found it, and Native Hawaiians are very agricultural center as master resource management people in the islands, because you have to manage everything. They brought those skills to Iosepa and created a system under the city with pipes to bring the water down from the aquifer. There was if you go to Iosepa, there's a fire hydrant, right? They had fire hydrants in what, 1897, 18,
Yeah.
you know. So, and that was from the Native Hawaiian saying, okay, we know what to do with an aquifer. We're going to bring it down. And
Okay.
so a lot of the improvements were because of the resourcefulness of the Native Hawaiians. And you have to remember too, Hawaii is beautiful, but it's also treacherous. Some places in Hawaii to it become, an agriculture, beautiful agriculture, resourceful, sustainable place. They had to go and do really hard things. It's lava rock. So
Yeah.
Hawaii is not an easy place to live and to create fish ponds. So they brought that. The Native Hawaiians brought that. So this narrative that they were just so blessed and God gave them the Mormon God gave them the strength, you know, it's ridiculous
Yeah.
and kind of sad.
So Janine was asking what transportation was used to leave Hawaii. I was just wondering, did they come as one bigger group or was it smaller groups that would come?
As far as I understand, it was one big group. And then there were some stragglers later on. I think there was some ahead of time and some the major group in between, in the middle, and then maybe one or two after. But they came by a big
Ships.
So,
sailboat.
okay.
Yeah.
They came into San Francisco and then to Utah from there. Now, when Queen, and this is at the time, and you have to think of what time that was. There was many Chinese in San Francisco, and at that time they were building the transcontinental. Is it the Transcontinental Railroad? And the
Yes.
spike in the middle of Utah is like, this is the golden spike in the middle. So
Mm.
there was still sort of like a developing transportation thing between um, California and Utah. So that wasn't like that was something they had to figure out. They probably, had people to bring them.
It wasn't easy for them to get to Utah from
No,
Hawaii.
no, it was not. It was not. It took months.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that some of the things that they don't teach us, that they didn't teach us in the church, was that they were writing letters back home on their journey. They were writing letters to their families saying, this is deplorable conditions. We're not being treated well. And these are letters that Native Hawaiians in Hawaii have, of people writing back and saying, this is not good. This is not what we were promised. This is not what we expected. So it's really hard to continue to look at this narrative where Native Hawaiians are happy-go-lucky and don't question and their faith is so strong. No, they were like, this isn't right. This isn't what you promised. And you have to remember, they were sovereign people of the Hawaiian kingdom, they were masters in their skill set. They could read, they could write. So the narrative that they're just a little bit submissive is painful for me personally.
Ipo, do you know if because during that time in Hawaii, the Hawaiian people weren't allowed to leave the islands, right? And then they let them. I mean, what I read, it was like
Mhm.
because they finally said you could leave and come back, and that's when this big group of people were taken to Utah.
So when the provisional government took over, they allowed the Hawaiians to leave. Before the provisional government was in place, they had to get permission or sort of some kind of travel permission from King Kalakaua or Queen Liliuokalani and the Native Hawaiian monarchy government that was in place. So I think there is some gray area there for me, because when the provisional government took over, which is the five businessmen, things changed, but they allowed them to go. But part of that was the provisional government wasn't as strict. Native Hawaiian government was a little more strict about their people leaving. They wanted to know where they were going. They wanted to know why. They wanted to know how they were getting there, you know. So the provisional government did allow it.
So this, where can people find this write-up? Obviously, there's a lot more information here than what you can find on the church website, which simply tells us about Joseph F. Smith.
Yeah, so I put the link down. I mean, it's not a link, but that's the website that I got this from, and that's the Iosepa Historical Association page.
And you
Okay.
have to know that the Historical Association, love them, but they're all TBMs.
Yeah, I was reading through some of it, and I was wondering if it was still written from what perspective, but still more information than you will get on the church website.
Now there's some two really deep, well-written books by Matthew K. Hester and Hokulani K. Aikau. And they're both written, I think it's their doctorate theses, or maybe, anyway, it's a paper that they wrote for their schooling. And the research in Chosen People Promised Land is so in depth that is what really, when I read that book from Hokulealani K.I. Cow, which went to Iosepa with us, we grew up with her uncovering all of these records at BYU Hawaii and some of the archives there, and how it really boiled down to this was a business for the church, was intense for me to see as a Native Hawaiian. It was intense. And anybody wants a really deep dive into it with every little nuance, little thing covered, that's the book. That's the book to read.
Will you say that name one more time?
It's called Chosen People Promised Land, and it's by Hokulani K.I. Cow. And I can send you the link. I should have earlier. I apologize for that.
Yeah.
But now she's a little apologetic at the end, but it's okay. Still good, still really great information.
I included these pictures in the slides because I thought it was important to see that once they put them in this area, like they were thriving, right? They made these beautiful houses. They won an award in the state fair in 1911 for the beautiful place that they created, and their faces. I thought, we need to know these people. I don't know them. I'm not related to them, but I don't want them forgotten.
They did a lot of really great things, really. They did do a lot of really good things, bringing the aquifer water down and having beautiful ornamental flowers and turning it into a gem in Skull Valley. I mean, when we would go out there as kids, everyone was like, oh, your ancestors turned this into a gem. There was a map of how the town was laid out. When they got there, they really were like, okay, let's do that. Let's do that. But there was, they weren't always so content. They pushed back on how much they were being paid. They also went out and created a fish pond and filled it with fish so they could fish. So not only were they creating their own resources, but they were working for the church. But at the same time, like halfway through this project, about 33 were like, we're done. They started writing home. So a representative from the provisional government came and negotiated their leave and paid for them to go back to Hawaii.
And so this group grew to a couple hundred. Is that right?
I think it was just under 100, but yeah, about 200. Yeah.
Okay. And it started off around 50 or so, and then grew as time went on. And
yes, and then they had babies. Some children were born there. So, and then they also had some Irishmen that came in that were also, not accepted in the valley. They had a relationship with the Goshute Indians in the area, and they also had their own leprosy house because If you got leprosy, you got sent to Iosepa.
Oh, put your microphone back closer to your mouth. Yeah.
Better.
Yeah. And did you also say that there were other white folks living in Iosepa?
Iosepa had its own leadership that lived there. Yes.
It was the ranch owners, right?
The ranch owners.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure
Hmm.
because I thought the church owned the Iosepa, and then they had like actual church leadership people who lived there that would like sort of manage the operations and manage daily living, and they were the leadership there. And I know that for sure because when the white women who lived there were pregnant and had to have children, they were taken by wagon to the hospital in Grantsville. And
Sorry, Janine asked an interesting question. Did they practice plural marriage there?
no,
Okay.
that was a completely a concept that was outside of a Native Hawaiian worldview. It
Okay.
wasn't even like, but marriage was also a little bit different for them too. So, but there was not a lot of plural.
Isn't
plural
Hawaii
marriage.
more matriarch society? Like the patriarchal society that we're used to in Mormonism is not how the Hawaiians. It's matriarch.
Honestly, there's Native Hawaiian mind thinking is it's duality. Within every person, there's a female and a male principle. Within every natural element, there's a female and a male principle. And your strengths and your weaknesses are as such. So there was never any like, there are a lot of female ali'i or chiefess that called all the shots. And there were a lot of men that did the same. That wasn't within the purview or the mindset of the Native Hawaiian. That was a new concept when Christianity came.
Okay, so I was so the people have come over. They got put into their own area, and they're sending even people with leprosy to this town, that blows my mind. They are sending people across the mountain to build the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of thriving in a way. They're building houses and doing this irrigation type thing. So what, and at some point you had said that people they wanted to go back home and there was a way for them. Was that the main reason that the town kind of I guess
Fell apart?
Fell apart or closed down? Or
I think that's part of it. But really the narrative, and I think that this is actually across the board correct. When they announced, okay, so they finished building the Salt Lake Temple. After they built the Salt Lake Temple, they announced the next temple that they were going to build was in Laie. So the Native Hawaiians were like, why are we here? We'll go back home. Some people, a very few people stayed in Skull Valley. The people who stayed in Utah went back and kind of lived in an isolated spaces in the valley, in Salt Lake Valley, not Skull Valley, and the rest of the inhabitants went back to Laie. So really, it was the announcement that they were going to build the Laie Temple in Hawaii, so that the really faithful, they didn't have to be in Salt Lake to do their temple work. They could go back and live on the island and do their temple work. Right. And at the same time, at the end of Dennis Atkinson's paper, he talks about how this particular experiment just was the bottom line. The bottom line was not meeting. The bottom line was not happening for making money and being self-sustainable. So they were like, we can't put out more money in this. Encourage them to go home. The leadership said, encourage the Native Hawaiian people to go home. We're going to shut down this operation. So when they shut down the operation, they sold the property to someone else, and that was it. Nobody saw that again until nobody went and took care of those spaces until the 80s. When my dad and his friends went out there, they were like, When we were growing up, we had 3 ancient fire hydrants from Iosepa sitting in the side of our yard until they could get them restored. They were like, "Nope, we gotta take those." And look at this. Look at, we call it Ivi Kupuna, the bones of our ancestors. My dad was like, "No way, this can't stand." You know, so that became their passion project in Utah. And it gave them a safe space. In Utah, the Polynesians in Utah, or maybe not all the Polynesians, but the Native Hawaiians in Utah call Iosepa the Pico. The Pico is the center. So when they need to rejuvenate, we go near our ancestors. So yeah, the church was like, encourage them to go home. So that's
Yeah,
what ended the project.
that's the part that was so pitiful, is that basically the church said, this is, in my words, this is costing us too much. We need to
Correct.
shut this down. Is that?
That is right. And Dennis Atkinson says, well, it was just an experiment. And this is a respected paper written by a professor at BYU,
Yeah.
Provo, in 1951.
Yeah.
So,
Just
and he talks about
experimenting with people's lives, huh?
Oh yeah, like, don't worry, we're gonna promise you your afterlife, but if you can't make that bottom line meet, then we're gonna tell you something else and send you on your way. And then to just abandon it kind of gives you some insight into what they prioritize versus what a Native Hawaiian prioritizes.
Okay.
And also that they sent them back to Laie to go build another temple.
Yeah.
They had already been in Salt Lake helping build that temple, and they're like, okay, go build another one.
And all the sugar plantations in that area, those profits went to Salt Lake.
Oh.
So in Laie, when they went back, if they were working on a sugar plantation, it was almost free resources. First of all, they're not paying their water or taking care of things in Laie, and they're underpaying their laborers. This kind of rolls us into what they continue to do in Laie, which is labor missions, coercing people in Samoa and coercing people
Tonga,
in Tonga and New Zealand to come over, go to BYU, get a business education, but work for free or at lower cost of the PCC. Now the PCC that's a tourist destination. That's a money-making destination. And you have students from outer islands coming, working at a lower wage and trade for an education. In my opinion, Iosepa was not great. I mean, it was really not great. I think what they did in Laie and the PCC and all of that area is even worse. To coerce people to come and get a business degree, assimilate into Western society, and give us all of your information about your culture, and we're going to preserve it. We're not going to perpetuate it. We're going to preserve it. We're going to put it on display, and we're going to turn it into a commodity for us to use a tourist destination in Hawaii. And they're still doing that today.
And those kids that work, they work so hard. My daughter was roommates with them. They work so hard, and they have nothing. I mean, they're getting their education, but they don't get paid well. They don't. No. Hawaii is expensive. It is. It's hard.
And it's really interesting. Well, it's not interesting. I hate to say that phrase, but it's offensive. It's offensive that you see these things happening, and it's still happening now. And when I talk to other Polynesians, they're like, no, this is all good for me. And I'm like, you're going to get a business degree so you can pay tithing for the rest of your life, right? They want to set you up so you can be successful, no doubt, but they also want your 10% forever. So what really are you doing? You're trading you're bringing your cultural secrets to be turned into a commodity. Who's making that money? That's appropriation. That money should go back into those communities for the thousands of years of culture that were developed, that were given to the church. I don't know if you know Jenny Linsua or Sarah Newcomb, but Jenny Linsua worked for the PCC, and she said, no, nobody's ever talked about this. She's like, I'm so glad you're talking about this. I said, read this book. You're not the only one. And
Yeah.
then Sarah Newcomb, who is a Native American, kind of was like, there's some parallel things that are happening when we go and perform as Native Americans and no one can film except for the church.
Yeah.
Excuse me? It's not like they can license it, but they are somehow, and they're turning it into a commodity. Somebody
Yep.
said to me a lot last year, I wish the Native Hawaiians would have fought harder. And I looked at them and I said, stop exploiting them. Why do they have to fight? I think in Utah, I don't know if a lot of the members of white wards are aware, but and this is something that I get a lot of pushback from the Samoan and Tongan speaking wards. I said, you're not going to a ward that is in your area. You're traveling miles to go to a Samoan speaking ward. You're being segregated.
Yep,
And
that's what I was
they're
going
like,
to say. Still
they're like,
segregated.
yeah, they're like, oh no, this is good for us. I said, no, it's not. You need to be in with all the white people in your area so they can get to know you. And they can get to know your language and understand what's happening. What I started to understand as a child when my dad would take us to like his friend's Samoan ward or a Tongan speaking ward is what was being taught in those wards was a little different than what we were learning in the white wards in Sacramento. What are we talking about over here? When like I have many, many relatives that are still Mormon in Hawaii now. So, you know, we'll go with our cousins to a Hawaiian ward. It's different than what they teach you in the white wards in Utah. It's just off.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, look at what happened in Iosepa, the faith, what drove you. That message, that narrative still pulls in Polynesians today. And they are not telling the whole story. So
Yeah.
although, Polynesians have really blown up in Utah, the population of Polynesians make the Native Hawaiians in the valley still a minority. There's Samoans and Tongans, the Tongans and Kerns, the Samoans in Roseland, the west side. There's a lot. And they come over because of the church.
Yeah.
My dad was an LCSW and he focused on at-risk youth. So we had a lot of kids in our program. So they were kids who committed crimes and they went into the court system. And my dad had a 501c3, another 501c3. He was quite the entrepreneur. And he provided therapy and reunification services for kids out of GJJS that were separated from their family. There were a lot of Polynesian kids that just were disconnected. They felt unseen. You go to church every Sunday to your Tongan or your Samoan speaking ward, and you're making gang plans. I mean, there's memes about it all over that I find offensive. And the effects of how the church sees Polynesians is still problematic today.
Yeah.
Still problematic today.
That's kind of what I was going to ask. So, how were the Polynesian people looked at when it comes to like referring to them as Lamanites or something like that? Was that part? Would they have considered themselves Lamanites or?
It was a lot of mental gymnastics to negotiate that particular message, especially with me. My dad and my oldest sister are very dark and very dark hair, very dark skin. Because my mother is white, me and a few of my other sisters are very white presenting. When you go into BYUH or even a view of the inside of a temple and you have these Lamanites like this performative visual mural
Right.
of the layman, and I'm like, but I'm white. So I point to my sister, she didn't do anything wrong. For me, because of where I sat, I found it really confusing. I don't hear a lot of my Polynesian family refer to themselves as Lamanites now. In the 80s, a lot. because this was in the days of not Gordon B. Hinckley. Which prophet was it that loved the Native Americans?
Spencer W. Kimball.
And he was like, they're going to become white and delightsome before your very eyes. My mother thought that us being born with fair skin was a physical manifestation of this prophecy.
That it had already started in you.
And it was really just a science phenotype that happened because of biology, right?
Yeah.
So it's a white presenting layman. Hi, Anita. Okay, same girl. White presenting layman.
And Ipo, I've said this before that it took me a long time to verbalize this, but I realized, because I'm Native American, a lot of Native American in me, that I was racist against myself.
Yeah, it's an internalized.
I would get a tan, and then I would tell people, oh no, my skin's really lighter than this. I'm not really this dark. It's the sun. Like I was making excuses for my own skin, and it was because of the influence of the church.
We didn't even know it, and what was happening.
Yeah.
Didn't even know. And you have to, I once I left, I really was like sort of angry. So I angry researched,
Yeah.
came to where I was. But
earlier in the chat, they were talking about don't skip the angry stage. We all go through it.
Yeah. So I want to make sure we cover everything that was in the slides. I think you mentioned that there was a specific system of payment for the Iosepa people. Is that correct?
That's correct. They had their own money, and it was printed specifically for them. And then
you could only use it in Iosepa.
Yeah, at their general store. So they couldn't take this currency from the jobs that they worked and go into the Salt Lake Valley and spend it. They had to change it out. They had to get permission to change it out. Like, really, their comings and goings were controlled at every level. So you have this Iosepa money, but that you can only spend it in the Iosepa store. Well, guess who owns the Iosepa store? So when the 33 people were tired and they wrote a letter to the provisional government, and a provisional representative came over and said, these are sovereign people of Hawaii. They want to be let go. They've been writing letters back to our government. We're here to negotiate the release of these people. Dennis K. Atkinson describes that one of the leaders said, I really need to think about what I'm going to go tell these people. So he goes and he gives a big speech to the people of Hawaii. The speech is written, and any one of us who's ex-Mormon is going to, I read that and I was like, gaslighting. So some of them felt guilty and stayed, and they're like, I can gain my testimony, and I can work harder, but
I can endure to the end.
But there's a list. We have a list of who was like, nah, I'm out. Forget it. I don't want to. And I do think that this is a broader picture of people who come up with two mindsets, which I consider myself one. You go to Hawaii and you spend months and months with your relatives who are not Mormon. At a young age, you're living this dual life, right? So I think a lot of those settlers could relate to that and understand that, A, you ain't fooling nobody. I'm smart. I want to go home. This isn't what you fucking promised. Excuse me.
Yeah.
You're fine.
So that was challenged. Somebody challenged me on that, and I pushed back. And I was like, you go read the newspapers from the time. You go look at the statistics. The Native Hawaiians were literate. And there's another piece where we really wish, in Dennis Atkinson's paper, we really wish that Native Hawaiians would have kept a journal or a record, but they kept nothing. I call bullshit.
They were writing letters.
They were writing no way. And then at the end, he kind of alludes to an idea and suggests that there are records that have not been released from this time when the Native Hawaiians were there. And I am like, that makes sense to me. That tracks.
Yeah.
For how they like to release. You know what I mean? So
I think the more we talk about it, eventually it will become a gospel topic essay.
Of course.
Okay, so just going through a couple more of the slides, we talked about how it was a social and business experiment. I don't really know what is even meant by that. It was an experiment.
Because it was Dennis Atkinson's written word, I think that this is sort of a cop out, that they can close it down because it's not making money. They
Okay.
can say, "Oh, it's just an experiment. Send him home."
It
You
was
know?
a temporary commandment.
Temporary commandment.
It was, yeah. It kind
Okay.
of felt like a little bit of a cop out at the end because if they really were committed to the Hawaiians like they say they were, then they would have done everything they could to keep them there because that was the end goal, right? Um, to have them come there, do the temple work, and be a part of the, great movement that was happening in Utah. So I think that that particular blurb is just another sort of manipulation language
Okay.
to get
Yeah.
themselves out of really committing to the Native Hawaiian people, getting them out of
Yeah.
they became an expense is what I think happened.
Yeah, I think the word that you just said was manipulation. That they told them to come help build this temple, but the manipulation was the one that I have felt personally of do this so that you can be together with your family eternally.
Yeah.
It's that eternal manipulation that kept me in for so long.
Yeah.
I'm going to put up with this because my eternal life is more important than this life. And so they brought these Hawaiian people over with that manipulation of you come build this temple, then you can do the work and be with your ancestors forever, which the Hawaiian people love their ancestors already. Why would they not want to do that?
That particular messaging tracks with the Native Hawaiian mind.
Yeah.
You prioritize those who come before you so you can set up the people who come after you. So that particular, I think once they realized that tracked with a Native Hawaiian mind and a Pacific Islander mind, they were like, "Oh, that's what needs to be said."
Yeah.
And I do think that Brigham Young was savvy. He was savvy and lethal. He was deadly. Yeah. In Dennis Atkinson's paper, he discusses how Brigham Young, was it Brigham? Yeah, Brigham Young was like proud to be called a colonizer, So a lot of people are like, no one colonized Hawaii. Mormons didn't think that, and I'm always just show them the paper. Well, he sure did. He sure was proud of being a colonizer. That was the in thing back in the day. But
Yeah.
looking at the harm that it caused.
Joanna has a comment for Brigham Young.
Oh, yeah, this one.
For real, girl. For real.
Yeah, and then this person says it's making my blood boil. So, I think one of the problematic things that I've noticed from what you've said, Ipolani, is just first of all, awesome job for you and your family to go back and to clean the graves and take care of it. But that seems like, first of all, why was that put on you guys? And as this slide's pointing out, you'll have to tell me if this is right, but apparently the Hawaiian beliefs and customs require that ancestors' remains be protected and respected. Yet that wasn't done. Not until, it sounds like to me, until your family came along. Is that right?
That's correct. And it was a great motivator amongst my dad and his colleagues. And there was tension between asking the church for help and not allowing them to help. There was tension, and growing up, we go every weekend, we run around, we're playing with all the cousins, but there's a low-lying discussion that's happening that you overhear as a child, and do they want the blessings of the church? Of course. There's tension, or there's a line that they have to walk because they're trying to practice and be good Mormons, right? Because there's benefits to entering into that network as a priesthood holder. There's connections you get to make. There's help you get to ask for as a priesthood holder. And my dad, like, again, my dad was a bishop from the time I was in 7th grade until the year after I graduated high school. So I think that John Dehlin coined it. It was a functional or a utility Mormon. He, my dad and some of his colleagues and fellow bishops had to use it as a utility, as a minority person of color. He was one of the very few bishops I saw that with brown skin when we were growing up. But of course, my junior high and high school years, those are the formative years that I remember. So me seeing my dad, a person of color, on the dais was normal. But after he passed away, a couple of his bishop colleagues have left the church since and were able to share with me what conversations my dad and them had about how, it was a difficult position to be Native Hawaiian and toe the line for what the church wanted them to do. And one of my dad's colleagues looked at me and said, your dad, if he didn't want to do it, he wouldn't. And it was a little bit tense sometimes. So when we were in Iosepa, asking the church for help, or coming together as a community and trying to do it without their help, I think was a real big conversation, because then you're limited to what the leadership wants you to do. And I'm pretty sure we never want to see those graves. Any Native Hawaiian person ever wants to see those graves uncared for or unrecognized.
Yeah.
And real quick, I think about how hard it would be for those Hawaiians that were in Utah and they see all these beautiful monuments all over the Utah Valley for the pioneers, and how the church spent the money there to remember those pioneers that sacrificed to get them there. And yet they have, in Skull Valley, they have nothing to remember the pioneers of their own people. And so I can see how it would be hard for them to be like, do we ask the church, why didn't they do this already?
Right.
Or do we do it? Do we overstep our bounds? I can see how that would have been hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Wow.
why wasn't it? Why wasn't it a priority?
Yeah.
If they needed, and all of the money they're making in Laie, they have the money. Why isn't this being done? Because one, it's not the priority. I mean, and that's the bottom line. Like,
so there was one slide that I put in the slideshow.
You want me to do?
It's monument. Yeah. Go past that. Go past that. We can go back to these. Go past.
Yep.
Okay. This is the Utah Historical Society put this up. So this is the monument. Now go to the next page. If you read at the top, it says who the donors are. And the very first donor is listed as the Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Ezra Taft Benson, Gordon B. Hinckley, and Thomas S. Monson. And then the Queen Abigail, is that who it was? I can't see it. Princess Abigail. I think you're muted, Ipo. And then down the line a little more says the Historical Society, the Iosepa Historical Society. Right. And I asked you about that when I first interacted with you, and you said that's not the order. The church didn't pay for them.
Yeah, I would challenge that.
Yeah,
they blessed it, but as far as contribute to it, I would challenge that. I think that, like I said, there's sort of this push and pull. How much do we separate ourselves from it? How much do we bring them in? And I do think that they had to be like, okay, put the name on it.
And the society, the association, the Iosepa Historical Association, they still take donations. They're still raising money to keep this place in the pavilion and the bathrooms.
Correct.
When we sit with a church that has $295 billion.
Right, chump change.
But they can't help commemorate this area. It just breaks my heart.
there was they had to raise a lot of funds to build a new road out there. And when my dad was on, they were negotiating with BLM.
Yeah.
BLM owns the property all the way up behind that monument, up the hill and over. And before they built the new road, every year my dad had to negotiate with the rancher. He would open the street and let everybody drive up, and it wasn't a road. I mean, it was the way to get there, but it couldn't be considered a road. So I do think I still know a lot of the people who sit on the board of the historical society, but honestly, they know where I stand. I think there's still a narrative to be upheld by certain members of the community.
One of the questions in the chats was, did the people that moved back to Hawaii stay in the church? And the majority, what would you say?
Probably yes. Probably yes, but
they were working on the temple, right?
But I think too, you have to understand that practicing Mormonism in Hawaii isn't like practicing Mormonism in Utah. It's probably more similar to practicing Mormons outside of the Utah bubble. There's a different level of competition. There's a different level of expectation. There's a different standard of performance. And when you go home to Hawaii, and it's a different vibe. People, my dad would say, we're Hawaiian first. We're Hawaiian first. Then we're Mormon.
Did your dad, was he faithful LDS his entire life?
No, he got he got baptized because my mom insisted it to be married.
So your mom was your mom, who is the Hallie, was Mormon and then converted your dad.
But there was Mormons within my dad's family, though.
Oh.
It wasn't like it was a new thing for him.
But until death, was he faithful? Or
yeah. I think he was smart. And a lot of this, he's the first person to get his master's. He lives in Utah. He's become a leader in these communities. But at the same time, learning that he was also a social worker, so they loved keeping him in that position. It's hard for me to talk about it because he's passed, but
Yeah.
I don't believe, after reading his journals, reading kind of how he approached things, I believe when he told us when we were younger that you're Hawaiian first before you're Mormon is how he negotiated this position in Utah.
I see.
So he went to, when he, isn't that beautiful? Look at all the flags. There's a time capsule underneath that monument.
Oh, wow.
Over there on the side, there's the fire hydrant, and the fences get kept up. The people continue to raise money every Memorial Day. Many, many Polynesians go out there and celebrate. There's a board still, so it's a sort of a thriving event. And I know the Boy Scouts go out there a lot to do things. But there's my dad.
I was going to say, is this your dad?
Yeah, there's my dad and his sisters who one lived in Iowa and the other lived on Kauai. But you see, this is right after it went up. And if you look behind him, you can see really what it looked like for many, many, many years. This was in 1992, this particular picture. And then the pavilion didn't go up until I think the late 1997, early 1998. Okay. But yeah, they did one thing at a time, just slowly did one thing at a time. Who is that? Hinckley.
That's President Hinckley and Marjorie Hinckley.
The one time I think they came out for the dedication. It looks like the memorial's behind it. It was an interesting thing that year. I was younger, right? And everybody was like,
he's coming out. Everybody act proper. And all us Hawaiian kids are like, so what? But I think that they understood that. I think every Native Hawaiian understands, after not just colonization, but the overthrow of the Native Hawaiian kingdom, we code switch. We know we got to act a certain kind of proper in front of a certain type of people, but is that our true selves? Probably not. I think probably that as a Native American, when you have to code switch between culture and language and where you stand, and sometimes it's a heavy line to walk.
Yeah.
I did like how Hinckley, he's just describing the place, and it sounds like he describes it fairly well. He says, "This was not the desert we see today. This was once a beautiful community and a part of a large mosaic of communities that our people established all over the West and Utah." And then he says, "And among them stood Iosepa, as a gem, a paradise brought from the islands of the Pacific to the desert of the West." So,
yeah. Oh, 89. Wow, it was off a couple years. Yeah, 89. Wow.
Yeah.
I was in 8th grade. Oh my God.
oh, okay.
I graduated from high school. That was the year I graduated high school.
And I think that, prophets and the quorum of the 70 and upper management are masters of messages. Yeah.
Yeah.
They realize that their words are going to be something, a pillar or the rod that people and members hold on to and accept as the narrative for years and years and years and years to come. And, mahalo to him, but also as we unpeel the layers, is what we call it, as we unpeel the layers of the onion to find out all the information, sometimes that stink inside makes you cry and it's painful.
Yeah.
But you have to look at it, and however people decide to go and continue to either worship within this organization or leave, I don't think there's anybody that can hear Iosepa's story and not feel moved.
Right.
Because the Native Hawaiians are resilient. The Native Hawaiians were welcoming. The Native Hawaiians, created a trade system with the Go Shoot. They had a leprosy house. They created a fish pond. Like, there's no doubt that parts of the story of resilience and overcoming is true. Whether or not, though, it's based in their faith in the church, I would question.
Yeah.
A lot of them came with that and contributed to the church. And I personally don't think the reciprocity or reparations have been paid back to the people who built it. And just by forgetting it, for me, is the red flag.
Yeah, speaks volumes.
Yeah.
So one way that we can try to remember this place, do I understand it right that they have a yearly celebration of some sort? Is this what's going on here?
The annual celebration. The point is to go a few days before, do all the work together as a community, clean the graves, mow the lawns, prep, and then on Saturday we have luau, and they put create a emu in the ground and they cook food for everybody. It's become a little bit more commercialized in this time. But it was quite special before we had any resources out there. It was a very community-oriented endeavor, because a lot of people wanted, one, to connect with their Pacific Islander community, and two, if you're a Pacific Islander, how good you feel when you work together in a community to accomplish a project. And this is what became so appealing. We work. We go out on Wednesday, work. Saturday, we cook, we celebrate, we eat. My dad, we'd have a dance party at night, even in the rain, come rain. And then Sunday, they worship. They have some kind of church service and everybody goes home on Memorial Day. So that's how it started. That's how Iosepa started. There's not a lot of working to be done out there now. All the work is done. So going out and cleaning graves doesn't happen as much. So I don't know what kind of events they put on now. I haven't been back for a few years, to be honest with you, because it is a little bit painful for me to go see this commercialized version of it. But still, the spirit of the people who worked really, really hard sit in the ground there. And it's something to behold if you go out there and it's painful, and it's also beautiful. So a lot of things that I think that we as ex-Mormons have to negotiate is the pain, and also how far we've come.
Yeah.
Well, this has been very inspirational and also kind of heart-wrenching at the same time to see what was done here. I don't have a lot of ties to the Hawaiian people, but I do have the last funeral I attended was someone from my wife's family who was a good friend of mine, and in our stake presidency, when I was bishop, he was in the stake presidency. His last name is Figuera. I don't know if that's a Hawaiian name or not, but he was an awesome guy, and he spoke all the time about living in Hawaii, and so I feel like I lived it through him because I was always hearing him speak, and so it was that was the last time I've been in a Mormon church was at his funeral, and I went back and once again, there was a lot of stories about Hawaii and things. So
Pacific Islanders make it easy to step foot back into a church. I'm not gonna lie, like all all the ways that they are, like it's mahalo for sharing that, Nathan. I really appreciate that you have a positive experience with Pacific Islander people, and I hope everybody does.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if Ruth or if Ipolani, if you have anything else to share about this, or if anyone has any questions in the chat. We have a moment or two.
I wanted to see if we didn't cover something, or
I think as far as the slides went, I think everything was there,
Yeah.
but
I think for me, when I heard the story, I wanted to do something for Iosepa. I wanted to donate. I want to go. I want to do something. Would I be accepted if I went during their memorial celebration, since I don't have family?
Of course, of course.
I mean, I know the answer. I know Polynesians.
Yes. And of course, they're going to accommodate anybody who wants to come and learn and just be a part of it. And just going to see the graves, I think, and spending a day up there, even with the accommodations and the comforts that are there now, I think you can get a really, really clear vision of the hard work and the horrible, I'm just saying, the horrible conditions that exist out there. I mean, if they were like, I'd be like, I'm going home. I'm going back to my, just knowing, it shows just the tenacity of humankind, not just
Yeah.
Pacific Islanders, anybody who, is fierce about their belief or wants to be or wants a positive change for their own life. So I would encourage everybody to go out and just visit it, to see it, and make their own assessment and find their own, experience there, because it's amazing.
I would tell people, I mean, I don't know how we'll do it. Maybe I can post in your comments on YouTube after, and I can put the association link, but there's maps. You type in Iosepa, Utah, anywhere on Google, it'll get you there. You'll figure out how to get where it is. And I think there was a few people in the comments who said that they were moved and they want to go see. So I think if you're moved and you want to go, and
we used to go.
I just am touched by them so much.
We used to go, but not in the grave. We used to go and try and, at night, it was pitch black. And if you go at night and you spend the night and the stars are so beautiful, but everybody was like, are there ghosts? And I'm like, yeah, there's it's an experience. So thank you for having me on. Thank you for sharing.
Well,
Really
it's been a great hour, almost and a half, and thanks so much for speaking with us at this time. But also, I know you've been speaking about this on your own channel and things. You want to tell people where they can find you?
I'm a tattoo artist, so if you can find me on TikTok at Co Studio Creates, and I'm also on I'm kind of on Meta, but not really. I'm on Instagram, but you can find me on all the social medias, and my handle is co-studiocreates.com. So
She makes the most beautiful tattoos. I still haven't decided if that's what I want yet, but if I get one, I'm coming to you.
would love to have you here. Would love to have you here.
All right. Well, thanks again. Thanks, Ruth, and thanks. We have still 30 people that wanted to learn more about this, and so we hope that you've enjoyed this. I know that I've learned a lot, and I wasn't surprised to find the little bit that the church has told isn't quite even half the story, or maybe not even much of the story at all. So thank you, Ipolani, for instructing us and teaching us and being such a lovely person that you are. And hopefully we'll get to chat again in the future.
Indeed. Mahalo, everybody. I hope you guys have
Mahalo.
a
Aloha.
wonderful night. Okay.
All right. Everyone
Thank
take
you.
care, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a good night.
Bye.